So ever since we got our first look at Assassin's Creed Mirage, I knew this was a video I wanted to make. Not only because in some ways the environment and setting of Mirage feels somewhat similar to Egypt from Origins, but also because these two games share a lot of DNA when it comes to gameplay. There's also a few references and items in Mirage that serve as little callbacks to Origins, and after all, Bayek did co-found the Hidden Ones that Basim would become a member of 9 centuries later. Now if you're unfamiliar with this which game is better series of mine, I take two games from the same series and compare them from top to bottom in numerous categories, and at the end I give my opinion on which one I feel is the better game. I've been doing this for quite a long time. In fact, I did Valhalla versus Origins when that game first came out, but what's important to consider is this is my opinion. I can already tell there's going to be some very divided opinions here, with those who prefer Origins and those who prefer Mirage, so feel free to leave which game you think is better and why down in the comments. I just ask that you please keep it respectful. There's no need to attack or be rude to others, it ain't that deep or serious. But I just wanted to make something clear before we get into this. I love both of these games. I love them both for different reasons, which I'll get into, but even though I'll have to choose one winner by the end, I just want it to be known that I do thoroughly enjoy both of these entries, and I think a lot of people's opinions will be based on the type of Assassin's Creed game they prefer. Those who prefer the older style as opposed to the RPGs will likely have a preference towards Mirage, and vice versa for those who prefer the RPGs and Origins. While they do share some DNA, these are still two very different types of games in terms of style and design. But without further ado, Assassin's Creed Mirage versus Assassin's Creed Origins. So I wanted to start this by comparing the two settings and open worlds. Of course, Origins taking place at the end of the Ptolemaic period in ancient Egypt, while Mirage in 9th century Baghdad. Now I've seen a lot of people say the setting and environment Mirage is set in gives them a bit of an Origins vibe, which I can sort of get as well, especially in the wilderness with the more open stretches of desert, and you've got the sand blowing throughout Baghdad. Both are in desert climates, however, in terms of open worlds, they are still very different. The biggest difference being in the size of each open world. Origins world is obviously much bigger than Mirage's. As for Mirage, they wanted to intentionally make a smaller world that focused more on the massively dense city of Baghdad. Whereas with Origins, the goal was almost the opposite. They wanted to make one of the biggest open worlds in Assassin's Creed to date. Now I know everyone has their preference when it comes to open world size, and each has its pros and cons. The pros of having a bigger open world like Origins is you get a sheer sense of scale, scope, and wonder. There's a lot more to explore, more opportunities for unique environments, and to implement more quests and content. While the downsides are, you can't put as much detail and time into each and every area of the world because there's just so much ground to cover. Origins world does have a lot of empty space, which I never really necessarily had a problem with, since I always felt those massive stretches of desert really added to the scale of the world and the experience one would expect from a game set in Egypt, and Mirage does have some open stretches of desert in its wilderness like I mentioned earlier, although there's definitely not as much. And Egypt still has its fair share of large dense cities like Alexandria. But what I appreciate about Origins world is how unique a lot of the areas feel. Even though a majority of its world is in a desert, I always thought they did a really good job of still giving you variety with the environments and making Egypt still feel alive and vibrant. A lot of the world may be desert, but you'll still stumble upon plenty of areas with palm trees, bodies of water, lush shrubbery. It's by no means a lifeless world, and from a visual standpoint, it still holds up exceptionally well. In fact, I'd still argue that from an all-around presentation standpoint, Assassin's Creed Origins is still the best looking AC game to this day. For me, that includes everything from environments to character models and cutscenes, which we'll talk more about later. But what about the advantages of having a smaller but more dense world like with Baghdad? Well, I for one have always preferred when an AC game takes place in a dense city. I think a city with buildings, tons of parkour pathing, and NPCs has always suited the fantasy of being an assassin in these games better than those larger, more spread out open worlds. And while Mirage's world is obviously smaller than Origins, it still never felt small to me. The city of Baghdad itself is massive, with tons of different regions and districts within it, and I enjoyed exploring the wilderness surrounding it as well, even if it didn't have quite as much to offer. Because of the reduced size, there's more NPC density to make the city itself feel live and bustling, and giving more opportunities for crowd blending, which of course isn't even a possibility in Origins. Baghdad also has the big advantage when it comes to parkour design. Origins is still fairly well designed for parkour in its larger cities, but a majority of the world is not in a city, making the parkour feel more like an afterthought than a priority for traversal. You can't use parkour when there isn't much to parkour on after all. So from a general design and parkour standpoint, I prefer Baghdad to Egypt. It's a world that supports the assassin fantasy much better, but where I will give Egypt's world a nod over Baghdad is in its side content and exploration. Egypt, of course, being significantly bigger, as I mentioned earlier, gives more exploration opportunities with unique locations. My favorites being the various pyramids and tombs you can enter and explore. On top of this, Origins also has some more lengthy and engaging side content in my opinion. I don't dislike the side content in Mirage by any means, in fact I quite like it, but Origins definitely has some higher quality side quests that feature some fairly interesting stories and can run on for decent intervals of time. The closest thing Mirage has to these side quests are the Tales of Baghdad, which while fun and memorable, are far more limited and to a smaller scale than a majority of Origins side quests. The bulk of Mirage's side content comes through contracts, which again are quick assassin fun and have some small stories attached to them, but don't offer a ton in terms of substance. Now some of Origins quests can be like this too, but there's also a lot of longer running quests that'll take you to multiple different locations, introduce new characters, and have actual motion captured cutscenes that make them feel to a higher quality. So as far as open worlds go, I prefer Baghdad for its focus on a smaller but highly dense and detailed world, while I prefer Origins side content for the level and quality of stories and missions you can find, some of which even tie into the main story and flesh out some of the game's characters, making them feel more important than your typical side quests. The gameplay is going to be rather interesting to compare, since these games do share some similarities, but they also have their fair share of differences and design choices. But let's start by talking about parkour. I'm pretty confident in saying Mirage has better parkour than Origins, although the system is still roughly the same. Both games have rather simple and basic parkour, but what gives Mirage the edge is Baghdad's world design. Like I said earlier, this is a world that is far better designed and suited to the use of parkour, and it's also far more encouraged. So even though the mechanics themselves in Mirage are still basic and similar to Origins, it generally feels and plays a lot better in this type of environment. The ejects work a lot better in the city because the parameters to make what the system considers a safe eject are oftentimes met because of the close proximity of the buildings and different objects. The vaulting in Mirage makes the parkour feel smoother too. Vaulting is possible in Origins, but it's way more situational. Whereas in Mirage, the vaulting animation triggers often, as there's more objects you can vault placed throughout Baghdad. And this may be a small thing, but Origins doesn't feature an actual sprint input like Mirage, so the movement and parkour in Origins does still feel slightly more basic and automated. I'm not saying Mirage's parkour is on the level of the AC1 to Revelations era, or even Unity for that matter, but it is still a noticeable improvement for me over Origins. Now, combat can be a little more difficult to compare because both games are aiming for different things with their respective combat systems. Origins has combat more in line with the RPG genre, so it has to support all these different weapon types and rarities, while with Mirage, the goal was to make combat a bit more challenging because the game wants you to do things stealthily, while Origins is more so about wanting to give the player as much choice as possible. Now again, this could be either good or bad depending on your preference. Personally, I've always been more of a stealth player, and it's what I enjoy doing in AC above all else, so I do like that Mirage's combat is difficult, especially when facing multiple enemies at once. However, looking at these combat systems objectively, Origins does have more depth to it. There's more combat skills to be unlocked in the skill tree, more weapon variety, and more unique moves, and I still like Origins parry more than Odyssey, Valhalla, and and Mirage's. The parry timing is more challenging, and it requires you to hold up your shield and then press the input at the right time. Whereas in every game since, you just have to tap a single input within a fairly generous timing window. I still feel like combat has been simplified and regressed even further since Origins, which is bizarre because even Origins combat is not the most complex, especially when you compare it to other games like it, like Ghost of Tsushima for example. Ubisoft honestly needs to try and replicate what that game did with its combat, because this current system, while not bad, doesn't really hold a candle to it in my opinion. Although I do largely prefer Mirage's combat animations, I will say. I love that almost every time you get a kill, it'll end with some type of finisher, although the fancier ones are a bit harder to trigger. The animations look a bit more fluid. I never liked that in Origins you only get a finishing animation on the last enemy in your encounter, while the others you just hit them until they ragdoll. It's not as satisfying to me. But for Mirage versus Origins, I'd say Origins has the slightly better combat system of the two, although it's the complete opposite for stealth. Stealth in Mirage is a step up from Origins in pretty much every single way. There's more tools and tool depth in Mirage, and even the tools that Origins does share with it are far more situational and simple. Like for example, Origins does have the sleep dart, but it can't be upgraded or modified in any capacity like it can in Mirage. Unless you count increasing the size of your tool bag, that's about it. It has the smoke bomb, but you can't actually aim or throw it. You can only drop it at your feet after a dodge or melee attack. It does have the bows, but the throwing knives serve a similar purpose, and once again are upgradable and can be modified. And as fun as the Predator bow can be to use, I didn't really find myself missing it in Mirage. Origins was also the first game in the series to not have guaranteed assassinations. If you upgrade your hidden blade consistently, that usually isn't too much of an issue, except for some of the more elite enemy types like captains, but I'm still not a big fan of having to upgrade the hidden blade just for it to serve its main purpose properly in stealthily assassinating targets. The only enemy type in Mirage that you can't one-hit assassinate are those bounty hunters that track you down once you reach max notoriety, which makes sense as those are supposed to be very difficult to kill, similar to the Phylakes from Origins. I'll also say Mirage has better animations in my opinion. Origins has a very limited pool of assassination animations that don't necessarily look bad, but they do get repetitive and there isn't much variety to them at all. The chain assassination in Mirage is also improved, not only from Valhalla but even Origins. There were so many times in Origins where the throwing knife from the chain assassination would just straight up miss its target. It happened pretty often, and a big part of that is how slow it is. Basm chucks the throwing knife a lot quicker, so it felt way more consistent. And while I'm actually talking about this subject, I want to make a correction to something I said in my stealth video for Mirage. I had said there were times in Mirage where I felt I should have been able to chain assassinate, and the game just didn't let me. And someone in my comments pointed out that you can't actually chain assassinate in Mirage if you don't have any throwing knives in your inventory. I felt really stupid for not noticing that sooner, and it actually makes a lot of sense. But anyways, the point is, the chain assassination in Mirage works far more consistently than it did in Origins. Origins also doesn't have an ability like Assassin's Focus. So many people were skeptical about having this ability in the lead up to Mirage, but it's easily one of the best parts of stealth in the game. I talked about this in way more depth in my video from the other day, but there's so many different creative and unique ways you can use Assassin's Focus that brings an extra layer to stealth. Whether you want to use it for movement, quickly chaining kills, saving yourself from a costly mistake, you can use it while falling. There's just so many ways you can use it, and Origins really offers no alternative or anything like it. Mirage brings back the traditional eagle vision that you can use to scan enemies through walls, while the only way to spot enemies in Origins is with Senu, the drone bird. In Mirage, you can use Enkidu to do the same thing, even though I didn't really use it that much because eagle vision was often more than enough for me. I even said in my Origins review that I wish it incorporated the traditional eagle vision from the older games as well, because flying around with the bird, trying to tag each enemy for sometimes minutes at a time, just isn't that fun or engaging for me. Origins definitely would have benefited from having eagle vision similar to Mirage. Mirage, of course, course also has social stealth, while Origins does not. The ability to crowd blend and hire out different factions to help you in your stealth encounters once again adds another dimension to stealth that is not present in Origins. Mirage brought back the notoriety system, which had been absent for quite a while, but was an integral part of those early AC entries. And if you've seen my videos talking about this before, you know how I feel about it. I love it. It once again brings another layer to stealth. You have to be careful who's watching when you kill guards in the open world, as there are consequences to being seen by civilians. Whether it's having them point you out to guards, rooftop archers looking out for you, or being hunted down by the very strong bounty hunters. Notoriety gives you another thing to think about and keep track of. It brings some more depth to the assassin experience, and again, it's something completely absent in Origins. And from a general design standpoint, Mirage is a game that encourages the player to use and interact with stealth more, while Origins is a game that more often than not wants the player to choose their playstyle and make a build surrounding that, whether that be stealth or combat focused. Again, it's just two different design philosophies, and whichever one you prefer depends on what you like in these games. I loved having the black box assassinations back in Mirage, giving you some freedom and choice in how you choose to approach stealthily taking down your targets. While a lot of Origins assassinations don't have much depth or complexity to them. You can either sneak in to assassinate the target quietly, or try to go loud and kill them in combat, which may be your only option sometimes if you can't one-shot assassinate them. In general, Mirage is just a game that is better designed and suited for stealth, while Origins only offers it as more of a playstyle. But I'm sure if you dislike stealth, then you'll probably prefer Origins. But for me, and I know a lot of the old Assassin's Creed fans, stealth will always be the #1 priority for us in these games, and as a stealth game, Mirage is certainly better. The way progression works in these games is very different too. Origins progression is level based. You do a specific task, complete a quest, etc. You earn XP that eventually leads to a level up. With each level, you get 1 skill point, while with Mirage, it's all linear based. You get skill points as a direct result of doing certain missions and contracts. There's no enemy levels or XP. I personally think Assassin's Creed works better without a leveling system, but in the case of Origins, it's a key part of the game. You need it because so much of the game stems from this leveling system. It's an RPG after all. I just don't like having some enemies, regions, and missions be level gated. And with Origins, it's pretty much mandatory for you to do side quests in order to be the proper level for the main quest line. I do a lot of side content anyway, so it's not a major inconvenience to me, but those who just want to play the main story can't really do that. Mirage doesn't have any leveling like this, so you can tackle those main missions how and whenever you want. Once again, it's just different design philosophies for each game, and I wouldn't necessarily consider either bad. It depends on your preference, and as I stated previously, I personally prefer Assassin's Creed games without the leveling systems, like Mirage and all the titles prior to Syndicate. But finally, let's compare these two games' narratives. I'm going to keep this spoiler free, as I know a lot of people still haven't finished Mirage, or perhaps are using this video as a way to decide which game they want to buy and play, so instead I'll just go over my general thoughts and opinions on each game's story without diving into any spoilers. Now structurally, these stories are actually pretty similar. In both games, the main goal of the story is to hunt down, find, and kill Order of Ancient members. In Mirage, you're doing it because you're a hidden one and trying to uproot their corruption in Baghdad, while in Origins it's more personal and revenge based, as the Order members are responsible for the death of Bayek's son. Both shroud the main antagonist in mystery, and I honestly think the Order leaders in both games are kind of underwhelming antagonists. But I think the point is for it to feel more like a mystery trying to uncover the leader, rather than building up a compelling main villain to hunt down. So structurally, the narratives are kind of similar with how it focuses around assassinating Order of Ancient targets. But I think in general, I do find the characters in Origins more interesting and compelling than Mirage. That doesn't mean I don't like Mirage's characters. I really liked Roshan's character, and honestly, Bazum has become one of my favorite characters from the most recent games. In fact, Bazum and Bayek have become two of my favorite protagonists in the series, but I do still prefer Bayek. His journey was filled with a lot more emotional beats, and it was easy to empathize and root for him. And I stand by my belief that Origins has the best performances and general presentation of any Assassin's Creed game. The voice actors absolutely killed it in this game, especially the performances by Bayek and Aya. I think the performances in Mirage are still good, but they're ultimately held back by the presentation. I talked about this in my initial review of Mirage, but this game's presentation in terms of cutscenes feels like a pretty big downgrade in comparison to Origins. There's nowhere near as many motion captured scenes, and the character models and facial animation look worse. It was kind of the same way in Valhalla 2, but I think the main reason for this likely has to do with the budget. Mirage was on a smaller budget and scope than some of the most recent games, and obviously it's costly to have scenes with motion and performance capture, which is a real bummer because I think that ultimately holds back not only the performances, but the general story as well. I already really like Mirage's story, but if its presentation was up to the quality of Origins, it would have been infinitely better. These almost robotic looking animations can kind of take you out of the story because the character movements just don't look real, which is because they aren't. They aren't being motion captured by real people. Now, Origins doesn't have motion capture for everything either, because that would just be absolutely insane to try and pull off for a game as massive as it is, but all the important moments and story beats, even some specific side quests utilize motion capture, and it really elevates the performances. Let me just show you how big of a difference motion capture can make in an emotional scene, and how it can elevate the performance of the actor. I am gonna give a quick warning though. I know I said no spoilers at the start, but the scene I'm about to show is towards the end of Origins. I need to show it to demonstrate my point, but if you haven't played Origins and don't want it spoiled, just skip ahead real quick.
Come on! Finish me! You coward! The waste of time!
I can't do it! I can't do it!
You killed them! You did this!
It came from over there!
I hope I never see you again.
Hurry!
I mean, the difference is night and day, and Basim's voice actor, Lee Majdoub, does a great job with his voice in this scene, but the body and facial animation on Basim just looks a bit off, and it holds back the performance. While in Origins, that's Bayek's actor, Abu Bakr Salim, on a stage in the mocap suit, and you can see how much more real and natural the movements look. That's why games like The Last of Us and God of War have such incredible looking cutscenes as well. Every cutscene in those games uses motion capture. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is overall I prefer Origin's story. I think the characters are more compelling and relatable. There's a lot more range and emotional beats within the story. Bayek and Aya make for some of the best characters in the entire series, and the presentation of the story only elevates all of that. It's also a story that's very important and foundational to the entire Assassin's Creed universe and lore. While with Mirage, I really like the characters and the twist throughout the story. I love that it actually feels like an Assassin's Creed story, being a hidden one, training, setting up bureaus, hunting down Order of Ancient members. The initiation scene is still a highlight for me, but the general presentation of the cutscenes frustratingly holds it back. So again, while I really enjoyed both, Origins to me still holds up as one of the best stories told in all of Assassin's Creed. Oh, and both of these games have incredible soundtracks. They both capture the vibe and feeling of the settings they're in. It's hard for me to choose between the two. Origins OST may be more memorable to me, but that also may be because the game has been out for 6 years, and I haven't really had the time to become super acquainted with Mirage's soundtrack. Either way though, both are great. So that finally brings us to the moment of truth. Assassin's Creed Mirage versus Assassin's Creed Origins. Which game is better? Well, as I said from the beginning, a lot of that probably depends on what you want from an AC game. Different people value different things in this series. Assassin's Creed Origins still holds up as a top AC game in the series for me, and I still believe it's the best out of the RPG games, but as someone who prefers the original formula of Assassin's Creed, Mirage is more more of my type of game. So in this situation, I slightly prefer Mirage over Origins. I believe Origins has the better side content, story, and some elements of the gameplay like combat, but I prefer Mirage's world in Baghdad, the stealth, parkour, and all those things associated with the old AC games that were missing in Origins. Again, that's just my opinion. Those of you who prefer Origins, I can totally understand where you're coming from. At the end of the day though, I really enjoy both of these games, and that's what's most important to me. They're both different genres of games essentially, so I'm definitely expecting some different opinions, but I'm curious to see what you guys have to say in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. Also, feel free to let me know what game in the series you'd like to see me compare Mirage to next. I was thinking Unity, since those two are a lot more similar in terms of design, so that could be fun. But other than that, thanks for watching everyone, and have a great rest of your day.